Hello, true crime and wine time friends. Thank you for joining me, your host, Terry Dussault, as I dive into the case of the Austin Yogurt Shop murders. If you have a case that you think we should cover, please go to our website at truecrimeandwinetime.com and use the case suggestion form. Or you can send me a DM at Terry True Crime on Twitter or on our Facebook page at True Crime and Wine Time. This case was suggested by two of our fans, Alicia of Austin and Jeannie of Sulphur, Louisiana. I knew a little bit about this case, but honestly, I didn't know all the details. When I started doing my research, my brain perked up as I remembered the billboard of the four girls. I, however, had thought the case was solved, and that's most likely why I never connected the dots when the fans messaged me to look into this case. Thank you, ladies, for sending me down the many rabbit holes I traveled while doing my research. My liver may need a couple of days to clean out all the wine it took for me to finish my research. Our wine pairing today, I am going to be enjoying a Llano Signature Rose, and it's a wine that truly reflects West Texas, grown in the high elevation, sandy sides of some of the best vineyards. This wine is an expression of what classic rosé should be: fruity, aromatic, food-friendly, or enjoyable on its own, or with some true crime. Let me open this wine. There we go. Get it poured. Yes, that is a longer pour than usual because this case needs it. If you have been enjoying True Crime and Wine Time, please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your reviews help our True Crime and Wine Time lovers find our show. It only takes a minute and one sentence and means the world to us. And we love hearing from you. This episode contains graphic content about children and may not be suitable for all listeners. This case remains unsolved today, even after 4 suspects were arrested, 2 were charged and convicted, 1 was released when the grand jury failed to issue an indictment twice, and 1 was released when there was not enough evidence to support the arrest. Now, the 2 that were convicted spent 13 years in prison. Then they were released after their convictions were overturned and all charges dismissed against them. One of the individuals who was not charged was shot and killed by the Austin police in a separate incident years later, which means all 4 suspects had their cases dropped. Okay, True Crime and Wine Time friends, I need to tell you this case is insane and has so many different parts that I will do my best to keep all of the players straight. And I'm going to take a drink of my wine because this case, like so many others I've covered, makes my head spin, but also makes my blood pressure spike and my liver hurt. December 6, 1991 was a day of work followed by some shopping and holiday preparations for most of us. However, December 6, 1991 became a day that Austin, Texas will never forget, and one that some say was the day Austin lost its innocence. After my time with this case, I would say not only did Austin lose their innocence, they also started down a long, dark road of getting justice for the families of the innocent victims and for the Austin citizens. On December 6, 1991, Austin police officer Troy Gaia, who was a rookie officer, was performing his normal duties patrolling on Anderson Street in Austin, Texas, when he noticed smoke coming from a retail center. The officer immediately notified dispatch and the fire department was sent to this location, 2429 West Anderson Street. Around midnight, the fire department arrived and began fighting the fire inside the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop. The police officer and fire department assumed the building was empty due to the late hour and proceeded with attacking the fire. However, as the firefighters were extinguishing the fire, they stumbled upon several bodies. There was 3 naked bodies bound and stacked up on each other, and one other body, also naked, laid separately. Firefighters later discovered that they had found Eliza Thomas, age 17, Jennifer Harbison, age 17, Sarah Harbison, age 15, and Amy Ayers, age 13. Investigator Jones told a reporter, "I mean, I've seen burned bodies before, but the enormity of that, to have the stacked bodies, and, we couldn't tell a lot then, race or sex. When you're able to put a name and a face and a circumstance, man." This scene was something new to Jones and was a brutal mess. Sadly, the attempt to put out the fire had potentially destroyed evidence and made the scene much harder to work. All 4 had been shot execution style and were covered with styrofoam cups and other paper items that were used, and some say with lighter fluid, to set the bodies on fire. Several of the girls had been raped, and all 4 were bound and gagged. Eliza and Jennifer were employees of the yogurt shop, and Sarah and Amy had stopped by to wait as their friends finished closing up the store for the night. The girls had a sleepover planned for that evening. The last time the girls were seen alive was around 10 p.m. when a witness said they saw 2 strange men hanging around at the back of the yogurt shop. And the last register item at the shop was a no-sell at 11:03. Once a discovery was made, the investigators quickly changed their focus from the fire to the murder. Police began by tracking down all customers from the store that day and began interviews with the girls' families and friends. I want to stop and tell you a little bit about the victims before we get much further into this case. The tragedy that their families have endured is beyond anything I can wrap my head around. Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were all best friends. Their funerals were all held together, with 3 being buried next to each other. Eliza Thomas was born May 16, 1974 in Austin, Texas, and was 17 at the time of her brutal murder. Eliza was your typical Texas teenager who loved hanging out with her friends and family. Eliza loved art and collecting knickknacks. Eliza dreamed of becoming a model and took care of her face and body and hoped to have professional portraits taken soon. Eliza's mother, Maria, told reporters that her daughter loved country music and that some of her favorite memories of Eliza were her getting dressed up to go out with her friends. Marie says her life was devastated and has never been the same. Eliza had a bright future, and her life was taken too soon. Next, I want to tell you about Jennifer Harbison, the other young employee of the yogurt shop. Jennifer was born May 9th, 1974, and was 17 at the time of her brutal murder. Jennifer was a bubbly, outgoing teenager who loved George Strait, which, Jennifer, who doesn't? He was awesome. Jennifer was a successful high school track runner and was called the Little White Runner as she was a minority on the team. I can't tell you about Jennifer without also telling you about her sister Sarah, who was born October 28, 1976, and was 15 at the time of her murder. As I mentioned, Sarah was at the store with her sister Jennifer, who worked at I Can't Believe It's Not Yogurt. Sarah and Jennifer weren't just sisters. They were very close friends. Both were active in FFA and loved their animals. Frank and Barbara, the girls' parents, have a memorial set up in their home for the girls, and they hope that one day the killers are brought to justice and that they receive the death penalty. The 4th girl who was murdered that day was Amy Ayers, who was born on January 31st, 1978, and was 13 at the time of her murder. Amy was raised on a working ranch and was a true country girl who loved riding horses. Just like her friends Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza, she loved country music and George Strait. Amy received a cutting horse for her 12th birthday, which she was training with. Amy met Jennifer and Sarah when she joined FFA, where they shared the love of animals and their country music passion. Amy's parents said she was always with her friends at the livestock shows and that they were all great kids. Amy's parents, like Jennifer and Sarah's, hope that the individual responsible for the murders is found and is sentenced to death. And remember, all of these victims could only be identified by their dental records due to the burning of the bodies. I gotta stop for a drink, guys. All 4 girls were taken way too soon and suffered what I can only imagine is a horrific and brutal death. All of the girls were autopsied by Dr. Tommy Brown from the Harris County ME's office in Houston, who was doing a weekend coverage trip for Travis County. It later became apparent that Dr. Brown missed a step in his autopsies. He did not check any of the bodies for accelerant, which later was a large issue in the case. As I said earlier, some said lighter fluid was used, but there's no verification of that. I need lots of drinks. This case is brutal, and my heart aches for all of these girls and their families. And this case is a must for wine time. Can't do it without my wine time. I want to take a minute to say a lot of the things I'm going to be telling you in the upcoming segment is disturbing. There was a lot of balls that were dropped, a lot of things that were missed in this case, a lot of rush to judgment, and many errors. I will try my best to contain my frustration and take drinks instead of sharing. Now, the police spent many hours interviewing the family, friends, visitors of the yogurt shop in the days immediately after the murder. As I said, much of the evidence had been destroyed either by the fire or by the firefighters when putting out the fire. Sadly, there were several deranged individuals who falsely confessed to these murders. Some reports even say more than 50 people provided false confessions to these murders. Police did know that Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were all shot in the head with a .22 caliber, and Amy was shot with the .22 in the head, but her fatal shot came from a .380. Amy and Jennifer had ligature marks around their neck and bruising around their wrist. Sarah and Eliza were both bound and gagged with evidence that Sarah had been sexually assaulted. The main door to the yogurt shop was locked, while the back door had been left slightly open, what we can assume was by the assailants. Roughly around $540 was taken from the yogurt shop, but there's some discrepancies on that. Now, Detective Jones selected Sergeant Mike Huck Huckabee, an officer who had previously worked with him, to be his partner for this case. Sergeant Huck was a father of a daughter just like Jones. Huck told a reporter, "I saw things in Vietnam, and I thought nothing will ever match that." Well, this matches that, because it's Austin, Texas, right down the street from where we live. Both officers agreed that they wanted to do right by this case and the girls. Therefore, before submitting any arrest warrants or an indictment, they wanted to make sure they could prove their case on all aspects. Now, due to the lack of big city crime lab, Jones and Huck sent everything to the Texas DPS CSI lab, who had a criminalist trained in DNA. Jones wanted to call in the federal agents who he had worked with on a previous case for help. However, at the time, others worried this might cause a discord with the local team. However, after much persistence by Jones was successful and the federal team was called in. You will hear throughout this case, Jones was tenacious. and did not give up and still has not given up. Roughly 8 days later, police interviewed a 16-year-old by the name of Maurice Pierce, who had been picked up several blocks away from the yogurt shop and was carrying a .22 caliber gun. Maurice Pierce told the officers that he lent his gun to his friend Forrest Welborn, who was 15, and that Welborn used the gun to commit the yogurt shop murders. When police questioned Forrest Welborn, he denied this and told police that he, along with Pierce and 2 other friends, Robert Springsteen, age 17, and Michael Scott, age 17, had stolen an SUV and drove the stolen car to San Antonio. Now, this put Springsteen and Scott on the police suspect list. Investigator Jones told a reporter that he and the investigation team dismissed Pierce as a suspect and said that he was lying. They also felt that Welborn was not a suspect, as he wasn't sophisticated enough to pull off this crime. Jones said part of this conclusion came from the fact that fellow detective Hector Polanco didn't get a confession out of Pierce and said, "My story is, if Hector couldn't get him to confess, he didn't do it." Polanco was a Barracuda-type investigator who would do whatever it took to get the confession. Polanco later became infamous for putting 2 individuals behind bars with false confessions. Those confessions were later overturned when the real murderer came forward. Jones also cleared Pierce since the ballistics from his gun didn't match those of the murder weapon. In March of 1992, the task force spent several weeks looking into self-proclaimed satanic occult group, which later turned out to have nothing to do with these murders. The task force went on to look into over 200 men who were identified via the tip line, with none of them turning out to be the killers. Police even took into custody a man who resembled one of the men in the sketches that was released, only to release him after verifying his alibi. Okay, true crime and wine time friends, I have to tell you about my newest pairing for wine time. Best Fiends. I am in love with this puzzle game, and it is the perfect pairing for all of my wines during wine time, and it helps me to get my mind off the sometimes brutal and just horrible images that are running through my true crime brain. I just started playing and I am already on level 85. There are all of these adorable characters that you collect. My favorite is JoJo, who is a beautiful, sassy butterfly. And you earn keys to open the locked doors that hold extra items that you can use to upgrade and evolve your fiends like JoJo. I connected my game to my Facebook account so that I could play with my friends and share gifts with them. And as you can guess, bragging rights when I'm ahead of them, like my friend JT, who is only on level 60. Come on, JT, I'm beating ya. So, and you do not need internet to play. So I'm able to play in the car, out doing errands with my husband. Also, when I'm out by the fire, enjoying my wine time. I love all the bright colors and that I can play as much as I like or as little as time allows. For me, it's perfect. And I feel like I'm giving my brain some much needed non-crime stimulation. Believe me, I need it. And you need Best Fiends for your wine time. So come on, engage your brain with fun puzzles and collect tons of cute characters. Trust me, with over 100 million downloads, this 5-star rated mobile puzzle game is a must play. Download Best Fiends for free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends. By March of 1993, the task force had investigated and cleared 3,000 of the 5,000 tips that had been called in, and they added additional officers to clear the last 2,000. Investigator Jones was promoted and stopped working the case, and the case grew cold. Detective John Jones told a reporter in 1994 that the case came before everything else. My own psyche was a victim of that. My home life took a back seat a couple of times, which is a definite no-no. You try not to bring that stuff home, but I did. And everybody knew it but me. It almost ended my family. It came close. Too damn close. I have to interject here and say that yes, many of the articles say that Jones was promoted, and yes, it was a promotion, but I have to also tell you that he was transferred out of the department against his will, and perhaps because of his feeling that the case was mishandled by the higher-ups is why he was transferred. Jones told a reporter that they couldn't get the manpower they needed for this case. He said it was petty politics between departments. And of course, the chief said this was not true, that one of the detectives who was on this case was removed due to getting false confessions out of suspects by his unethical tactics for allegedly feeding the suspects the details on the case. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I agree with Jones. Jones was given 2 days to transfer all of this case onto the next investigator. And Jones said it was a slap in the face, and I agree. Sarah and Jennifer Harbin's mother said they felt abandoned by the Austin Police Department because of the transfer. The citizens of Austin and the girls' families worked hard to keep the story in the public eye. The case remained cold until Detective Paul Johnson picked up the case and began reworking the case. Johnson reviewed all of the case files and tips that had come in since the murder happened 7 years ago. Paul Johnson zeroed in on Maurice Pierce and his .22 caliber gun. In September of 1999, police arrested Robert Burns Springsteen, Michael James Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Welborn for the yogurt shop murders. And after many hours and days of interrogation, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen both wrote out their written confessions. Charges against Forrest Welborn were dropped when the grand jury failed twice to indict him on the evidence, and Maurice Pierce's were dropped due to lack of evidence. Only Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen were officially charged. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to take a drink before we head into the trials. It's also a good time to tell you that I had to condense this. There is so much data, so much details that I could do probably 12 episodes on this case. I am going to suggest you go to our website and look at the case files. Robert Springsteen was the first to stand trial, and he was convicted on May 30th, 2001, and was sentenced to death. Springsteen's sentence was later reduced to life in prison after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that juveniles could not be sentenced to death, and Springsteen was only 17 at the time of the murder. Michael Scott was next to stand trial, and he was convicted on September 22nd, 2002, and was sentenced to life in prison due to the fact the jury could not agree on the death sentence for him. The majority of people involved in this case said that Springsteen and Scott were primarily convicted based on their written confessions and the videotapes of the interviews. In 2006, Robert Springsteen's conviction was overturned on appeal, and in 2007, Michael Scott's conviction was also overturned on appeal. Both men recanted their confessions and claimed that the confessions were coerced by the investigators. And to the shock of everyone following this story, and especially me, a photo of an Austin police officer holding a gun to Robert Springsteen's head during the interrogation shocked everyone. Maybe that's how you get a false confession. A grand jury called for hearings into the DA's office, and everyone involved in this case was under scrutiny and how they handled all of this. Sadly, the DA's office told the citizens and families they believed they had the right men and they would be retrying both men for the 4 murders. As I mentioned earlier, there was not a lot of evidence, and there was no, and I mean no, physical evidence against Robert Springsteen or Michael Scott. The defense counsel for both men felt that the police investigators fed information to Springsteen and Scott and changed their interpretation of the evidence to match these confessions. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott filed to be released on bond pending retrial. Now, the biggest update in the case was brought to light in March 2008 when the DNA from Amy Ayers' vaginal swab returned, and it did not match Springsteen, Scott, or the two other suspects that had been earlier released, Forrest Wellborn and Morris Pearson. Later, another DNA sample was tested from the ligature marks on Eliza Thomas, and that also did not match any of the four suspects. Another startling DNA test from the vaginal swabs of Jennifer matched the unknown male sample found on Amy. This was a blow to the prosecution, as there was not any DNA evidence found at the scene that belonged to Springsteen, Scott, or Wellborn or Pierce. On Wednesday, June 24, 2009, Travis County District Judge Mike Lynch granted bond for Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, and both men were free until trial. Now, this quote's rough, but it's a quote. Travis County DA Rosemary Lindbergh said upon the release of the two men, "I am convinced that Springsteen and Scott committed the crimes." Both trials were put on hold as the samples were sent out for further DNA testing. The DA did ask that both men be mandated to stay in Travis County and to have no contact with anyone involved in the case outside of police. In October of 2009, all charges were dismissed against Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen. The DA's office argued that this did not mean the men were innocent. It only means that there is additional suspect or suspects, and that the DA reserves the right to bring new charges in the future. I'm sorry, DA's office. Based on everything I could read, you have no evidence against these four. Okay, I said I would take one and not get too opinionated. I'm going to do that now. Robert Springsteen filed a lawsuit seeking compensation from the state of Texas due to wrongful imprisonment, which was denied as Springsteen and Scott were not found innocent. The charges were dismissed so that the police could continue gathering evidence. The police are still investigating Springsteen, Scott, and the other two. Morris Pierce was killed by Austin police during a traffic stop on December 23, 2010. Maurice had run a stop sign, and when he pulled over for the police, he jumped out of the vehicle and ran. Upon police catching up with Maurice, he pulled a knife out of Officer Wilson's duty belt and during the scuffle cut Wilson in the neck. Wilson was able to retrieve his gun and shot and killed Maurice Pierce. Officer Wilson was taken to the hospital where he was treated for a severed carotid artery. Maurice Pierce's wife, Kimberly, told a reporter for the Austin Chronicle that she felt the yogurt shop murders had to do with his death and that this case hung over his head ever since he was released from jail, because he was held for 4 years while they tried to make their case, and then the charges were dropped. Kimberly and Maurice's family said that the charges against him in the yogurt shop murders were false, as Maurice had been with Kimberly until shortly before the fire was seen at the yogurt shop. Kimberly went on to say that Maurice did not trust the police, and this was behind his run-in with the police, as well as several others. Kimberly said that Maurice had told her back in 2008, after a different arrest, he was scared of the police, and, quote, "If the police can pick you up with no evidence and keep you locked up for almost 4 years, I don't know how you're supposed to trust the police again." Kimberly says she keeps hearing that this was somehow justice. Her husband's death, some kind of proof that police were right all along about him and his involvement in the yogurt shop murders. That, she says, is simply not the case. Maurice's blood alcohol level at the time of his death was 0.14, which is well above the limit of 0.08, which I have to agree. He was never tried and convicted in the yogurt shop murders, and I can only imagine his fear of the police. However, attacking a police officer is never the answer. And in this case, Maurice gave his life because of that decision. I hope he is at peace now, and that his family has found peace, and that Maurice's daughter is able to move on. Now, as we take a look at the other person not tried in this case, Forrest Welborn, who was 15 at the time of the murder. When he was interviewed by 48 Hours, Welborn said of the detectives, "They tried to tell me what to say. They'd get right in my face and tell me everything I said was a lie. I wasn't going to lie about something like that." Now, the police's theory was that Forrest Welborn, the youngest, was the lookout. On December 9th, 1999, the judge agreed there was probable cause and Forrest Welborn was to be remanded to the adult justice system while awaiting the grand jury's decision on whether they would indict him on 4 counts of capital murder. The judge did grant bail, and Welborn was released on $37,500 bond, and he left the court with his father and mother. The DA asked for an additional 90 days to try to get an indictment, which was granted. However, once again, the charges were dismissed when the prosecution did not make its case. Forrest Welborn has always maintained his innocence and had hoped he could get his life back after the charges were dropped. The DA's office said they still consider him a suspect, and the police are still working to get more evidence so that they can charge him. Forrest Welborn, and he is a father and a grandfather, and he still lives in Austin, Texas. This next part infuriates me. As this case is being looked at now, it is apparent the vast amount of things that were not handled correctly at the crime scene and after. From the lack of first responders and detectives not wearing shoe protectors, lack of fingerprinting the bathrooms, the counters, and other services, to other evidence not being collected, or if it was collected, it wasn't processed. Looking back, they all agree there was things they should have done differently. And another way to look at this is that Austin at the time was a small city, and they were not prepared for this level of a crime scene. Even evidence that was collected went missing, and no one could explain how or why. Then you add the DA's office, who wants to hang their hats on the 4 suspects originally arrested and say that they are confident they had the right guys and are just missing some others. This is infuriating to me. Not only were many mistakes made in this case, there was police misconduct, interdepartment politics. We were lied to as citizens. Now, this is my opinion, but how can I not feel that way? Also, in the process, 4 young men's lives were forever changed, and some would say ruined. Plus, we have the families of the 4 young victims whose lives were shattered and who are still seeking justice. As of this podcast recording, there has not been any other arrests in this case, and it remains open with the Austin Police Department and the DA's office saying they know they had the right guys and just need to find the other individuals and get more evidence. Okay, I'm going to take another sip before I get into a few other things that make me crazy about this case. I don't understand why the police, after all those years of this case going cold, that they then rushed things along with these 4 suspects. There was not one physical piece of evidence against them. The confessions were suspicious. I mean, considering one suspect had a gun held to his head during the interrogation. And that detective was removed from the case because of his history of getting false confessions from innocent people. It had been 7+ years. Why not take your time and build the case, look for physical evidence, wait for technology to get better. Then, when you find out there is DNA that does not match any of the four, why continue saying you still believe the four are the right guys and that there's just another suspect or two you need to find? I am honestly baffled at this case. I feel for the families of the victims. I feel for the four suspects who, as of today, are 100% innocent in the eyes of the law, yet they had their entire lives changed. And guys, I can't imagine it was for the better. I don't know what paths they were on. No way it could be better. Now, I do hope that the Austin Police Department are taking hints from the other departments across, the U.S. who are using the DNA from crimes and matching to family members via genealogy sites, just like we saw in the recently covered Harvard case. After 28 years, I believe this is going to be their best bet to get true justice for the families. And when they get that DNA match and the individuals who committed these horrible crimes, I think they need to publicly apologize to the four they falsely accused. The families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy erected a memorial to their daughters in the hillside parking lot made of pink Austin stone, and it is inscribed, "In loving memory of Amy Ayers, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Eliza Thomas, forever in our hearts." I hope and pray that they get answers in this case. All of my sources are listed on our website at truecrimeandwinetime.com and in the notes on your podcast app. You'll also find pictures for the case on our website. If you want to take a deeper dive into this case, I suggest you read our website and also read the book, Who Killed These Girls, written by Beverly Lowry. I have also included a link to purchase this book in the episode notes and on our website. I couldn't put it down. I would love to hear from our fans. You can connect with me directly on our Facebook page at True Crime and Wine Time or on the Twitter at Terry True Crime. And if you can't get enough of me and you want to help support True Crime and Wine Time, help keep the wine flowing and support our research, you can join our members only at patreon.com/True Crime and Wine Time. We have several tiers available. Our episode today was researched by Terry Dussault, editing by Phil Dussault. Our theme music is by Adagold. We will be taking off for the holidays, and this is our last episode of 2019. Our next episode will drop on January 5th. Happy holidays from us here at True Crime and Wine Time. Stay safe, watch out for crime, and enjoy your wine time.